My name is State Senator Ed Kennedy, and I would like to welcome you today to the first edition of the Beacon Hill Buzz. And my guest today is Eileen Duff, a member of the Governor's Council. Eileen, how are you doing?
I'm great, Senator. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
It might be good to start off with you giving us a little bit of your background.
I would love to. I grew up, I tell people I grew up in a mixed marriage. My dad was a big Democrat, a member of the Democratic State Committee. My mother was a Republican, worked in the Eisenhower administration. So I grew up at the dinner table discussing political issues of the day. Believe it or not, my mother actually, before she worked for Governor Herter in the State House, but before that she worked for his son, who was a member of the Governor's Council. So I'm one of the few people that probably grew up knowing what a Governor's Council was. And my background's public policy. I started in telecom. Actually, when cable was a brand new industry, moved over to the wireless industry, and then eventually ended up at the FCC in Washington working on the Telecom Act with a commissioner.
Okay. And you have a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD, I think. Is that right?
I do. Well, it's a doctorate of ministry. It's actually, it's a D-Min, but
okay.
Yes, it is a doctorate.
Okay. And so could you tell us a little bit about the Governor's Council and what it's comprised of,
yeah.
and how often they meet and that type of thing?
Yep. Well, we meet once a week, and we're constitutionally mandated to meet once a week with the governor or lieutenant governor at noon on Wednesday. It's actually that specific. So we have a tremendous amount of access to the governor's office, which most people don't have the level that we have. Our chamber is actually within the governor's suite of offices. There are 8 members of the Governor's Council. We each represent 1/8 of the state, so it's bigger than a congressional district. They're very, very big districts. Because there are 8 and it's an even number, if there's a tie vote, the lieutenant governor can vote and break the tie, but only when certain things happen, meaning that the governor actually has to come in, he has to make this little speech, and then he leaves the room, and then she can sit down and make the vote. Now, what's interesting about this, and the reason I tell you this, is if the lieutenant governor is not present, the governor cannot break the vote. And this was actually voted on by the SJC a few years ago. So there's a lot of law, case law on this and what can happen. So it can be very interesting.
Okay. And there have been 3 times in history long ago when the governor and the lieutenant governor, those positions were vacated, and the Governor's Council took over the
Yep.
executive.
The Executive Council
yeah.
then, yeah, we're actually, I tell people we're in the succession line. It's a very obscure constitutional office.
Right.
And I tell people many times, you've probably heard me out on the campaign trail because we overlap, it's the most important thing you've never heard of.
Right.
A lot of people really have no clue what it is. And yet we have a tremendous amount of access to the governor, and we're making weekly decisions that impact everybody's life.
And so what is it that the Governor's Council votes on? I think that you do judges.
Yep.
And clerk magistrates, but you have a
Correct.
lot of other responsibilities as well.
We do. We approve or disapprove all of the justices of the peace, all the notary publics. If there are any commutations or pardons, they have to come through the Governor's Council. All the members of the parole board come to the Governor's Council for confirmation. We also vote on the Treasury warrants every week. I tell people that's probably the only thing that's pretty much a yes vote every week, because
Right.
if we didn't, no one would get paid, and
Right.
it would be, I don't think we'd like that. So,
Right.
but it's a lot of little things as well that we do. But the judges, the magistrates, the parole board, those are really the big ones.
And during the course of a year, how many judges are appointed by the governor?
It can be, this administration so far, I would say in 4 years, is probably close to 175 appointments overall. And the reason why people are like, oh my goodness, that's so many, it's because there's mandatory retirement at the age of 70. Mm-hmm. So there's a constant churn going on. We've been understaffed for a while in Massachusetts in the courts, so judges have been on what's called recall. So we'll go back and ask them basically, would you come back and sit for a while and be a judge again even though you're retired? Some of them, you don't have to do that, but many of them do. It's better for us to have a a full-up staff in all of the courts, and that's what we've been working to do.
Okay. And do you also have responsibility for pardons and
We do.
and commuting sentences?
We do, and the way that works is if a person has committed a serious crime, a felony, where they decide for whatever reason, they'd like to have a pardon, or they're in prison at the time and they want a commutation of their sentence, they have to apply to the parole board for that. They have to get a hearing with the parole board, and then the parole board would make recommendations to the governor. The governor and his legal staff would then review the cases and decide which cases they thought were worthy of having this, and then they would bring them to the governor's council. If that happens, we would then hold a public hearing with that person to determine whether to give them the pardon or the commutation. What's interesting about that is it used to be very common to do that. It's very, very rare in Massachusetts. In, I think, probably 21 years now, we've only had 4 pardons and 1 commutation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very, very rarely done. And that's, in my opinion, that's not a real good thing. There are a lot of people out there that have done things and they made mistakes when they were young, because usually the people that we see, they're young, they've done something when they were 18 or in their 20s. It was a dumb, stupid thing. Could have been marijuana when marijuana was considered a very serious crime. It's legal now. Mm-hmm. There are people who went to jail for years and served pretty heavy sentences for selling pot or buying pot within so many feet of a school. And so the reason why people want pardons a lot of times, Senator, is so they can get a job. Because if you have a felony on your record, it is very hard to get a good job.
Right. And there are certain jobs you just can't get at all if you
can't.
have a felony conviction. Do you think there'll be an uptick in pardons because of the change in the marijuana laws over the past couple of years?
Well, I hope so. The challenge is, the governor really, even though the parole board decides, the governor can signal to them that he is open to seeing pardons. Now, I've had more than one discussion with this governor about it. He's not a lawyer, so he looks to his legal counsel for guidance on that a lot. They've indicated in the past that they were very open to it. However, he just got a brand new legal counsel 2 weeks ago, so it's almost like we're going to start the process of education again. And it's a lot of paperwork to get your paperwork in, make sure it's correct, and then get it to the parole board, and then hopefully someone there will, take it up.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. People think it's easy. It's not. It's actually quite a challenging process.
I guess what I would wonder is whether or not there would be a special process just because there are a lot of
Because of the
people that have
pot.
been incarcerated for marijuana, and now that it's legal, maybe there'd be a different look at all of those people.
That's a great. I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that's something I can bring up to the parole board. Like, maybe it's probably time to really look at some of these things again.
Right.
The reasons people apply for parole, pardons too, it really, really is fascinating, why they do it. And it usually had to do with a job. There were a couple of people, I'll be honest. There was one guy, he's an older guy, I think he was up in Drake or Groton, and he wanted to go hunting with his grandkids. He was in his 60s, but he couldn't get a hunting license.
Yeah.
And he said, I was too embarrassed to tell them why. I got stopped when I was 19 years old with a bunch of kids in the car, this stupid, dumb thing. And he said, and that's what he wanted it for, was so he could go hunting.
Yeah.
So, you never think something you do when you're younger is going to have such a big impact on your life.
Right. And so you serve a 2-year term. And
2 years.
How many terms have you had so far?
I've had 3 terms. I'm in my 4th.
Okay.
So, as you know, every 2 years is a
Yes, I do.
a lot. I wish the Commonwealth would consider 3 or 4 year terms, because I think it would be more effective for us that are governing.
Right.
We would spend less time campaigning and more time governing. I also think there's a huge financial advantage to having elections. Every 2 years, it's very expensive to hold elections.
Right.
And people don't really understand how much. Just in a municipality, an election's about $10,000. So there's a lot of money to be saved if we can spread them out, but it's not my decision.
You think it would be a good idea to have staggered terms?
How,
Instead of, everybody runs concurrently now,
Yeah.
right, for the government. So that maybe you would have a 4-year term.
Yeah.
And elect half of the governor's council every 2 years.
I don't know. I've never really thought about it,
Yeah.
about doing that. I don't really know what the advantage would be, either in the legislature or the council, to have it staggered. The thing for us is that there's only 8 of us,
Right.
so you really do get to know those folks and work with them pretty well. So not having the consistency could be, I mean, you do what you have to do no matter what.
Right.
But it could be more challenging.
Yeah.
I actually think it would be more challenging for the governor than it would be for us.
Probably it would.
Honestly.
Yeah.
So,
What is your favorite part about the job?
that's a
Or the
great
most rewarding?
question. The most rewarding part is being able to help people. It
Yeah.
really, truly, for me, it really is. I like public service. I grew up in a family of public service. I think it's the highest calling that you can have, and I take it very seriously. I love people and I love campaigning. I mean, I live in Gloucester, so it took me over an hour to get here today. I don't mind that. It's
Right.
it's part of the juice, that keeps me going. But there have been, by the time someone calls a governor's counselor for help, they've kind of gone through the roster, and they're really, I hate to say it, but they're desperate when they get
Yes.
to us. And so if you can help somebody like that, it's really, really rewarding to be able to do that.
Well, and I think that's the case for many different public officials. If they get a call from someone who's at wit's end,
Right.
or you're the last call they're going to make, the last resort.
Yeah.
If you're able to come through for them, or make things be better, then that ends up being very gratifying. Don't you
It
think?
is, and they're funny things that people call about. I had an elderly woman, I grew up in Peabody, and this was an elderly woman in Peabody at the very beginning of my first term call, and she couldn't get her trash picked up, and she was furious. And I called the city hall, I did and still they weren't picking up her barrel.
Yeah.
So I finally called the trash company myself and said, look this lady's 85 years old. She's had this barrel out for a month. You guys, I don't know why you're not picking up. It's probably heavy at this point because it's been raining and such. And I said, but I'm barely 5 feet tall, and I went over there and I can pick up that barrel.
Right.
He said, so you fellas better get here and pick the barrel up. And they did. And that woman, it's a silly little thing,
Right.
but she didn't want to look out every single day for a month and see her barrel there. And as for many people, and a lot of elderly people, it's embarrassing to them. She's not capable of doing it herself. So, and I actually said to the trash company, by the time they get to me,
Right.
they're pretty desperate.
Yes.
So you don't want to be on the news. You really want to go pick this lady's barrel up.
Right.
So they did it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that there's 8 and that the districts are very large, and you live in Gloucester and you're
do.
here in Lowell.
Yep.
But how far south does your district go? Or,
So I have everything from Cape Ann, so it's so hard, I'm thinking in my head the geography, to the North Shore, Salem, Beverly, Danvers, Peabody. Then I go all the way up to the New Hampshire border. Then I go all the way west to Pepperell.
okay.
So I don't have, they've redistricted before I came on. I used to have like Lynn, or the council before me had Lynn and Nahant and Marblehead, which would have been really easy for me, to
Right.
be really honest, because those are close cities. But they, they cut things up according to population and everything. And I got Lowell, and I actually love Lowell. I think Lowell's one of the great secrets in Massachusetts.
There's a lot to like about Lowell.
There's a lot to like about Lowell. It's a good slogan. But it's the 4th biggest city, but it still has a small town feel.
Yes.
There's a lot to do here. It's great restaurants. There's an art scene. People really in a fabulous university.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, they don't get here. They don't think of it. And it's a great town. I really love Lowell.
Thank you for saying that. I
Oh,
appreciate
I
that.
mean
as
it,
as
so.
a former mayor. You're not an attorney.
No.
Do you think it's good to be an attorney, or what are the pros and cons of being an attorney
You
and not
know,
being an attorney?
there are pros and cons to it. Because I have a public policy background, and particularly my time in Washington, I worked with really great attorneys, and we worked on crafting law. I always tell people I worked, I think, with some of the best attorneys in the country, so I know enough. I know enough to make me dangerous,
Right.
to be able to ask the really hard questions and everything. But I also know enough never to misrepresent myself
Right.
as well. I come at the position from a little bit of a different perspective as the lawyer. So the advantage is that I don't play in the same sandbox, so to speak, as a lot of the attorneys. I'm not in court with these folks who are looking for jobs with us. They're not part of my regular circle of people, in my work people. It's a different scope of people. So my due diligence has, I can find out all about their legal skills, but part of my questioning really many times has to do with things that aren't about law, that are more about who you are as a person, because that, I think, will impact what kind of judge you are. I had a conversation at least 3 years ago with a man who was up for a Superior Court judgeship, and I was his district counselor, and he was I didn't know at the time any of his politics, but he was very conservative Republican. And so I said, let's go to dinner and let's sit and we'll talk and everything. And so we spent 4 hours together. We had a terrific time. And when we left, he said to me, you didn't ask me about a lot of my cases. And I said, no, I didn't. I said, because I can look that up. I mean, that's evidence. That's hard
Right.
stuff. I can look that up. And I said, I wanted to know who you were as a person.
Right.
What kind of a person you are. What kind of empathy do you have? What's your life experience that's going to impact you in the judgments that you make? Because when someone goes to court, no matter what the case is, it's usually the most important day of their life. And they want to know, they want to win, but even if they don't win, they want to know that they were heard. They want to know they got a fair shake. So I want to make sure that we have justices that are going to give people a fair shake.
Okay.
And so I ask questions differently. I throw them sometimes like last week we had a judge and I knew a lot of, it was actually, you would have appreciated it because it was someone who had a background in municipal law. And I asked a lot of questions about that because that's a very specialized part of
Yes.
law. Not everyone knows it.
Right.
She was very surprised that I really delved into the cases on that. But everyone has each counselor has a different thing that they ask about. The disadvantage of it, honestly, is more of a personal campaign thing. It's harder to raise money.
Yeah.
Because lawyers have more money.
Yes.
And I'm not in that circle of people. So, but that's not, that's a personal disadvantage. I don't think for me with my background, I think if you had no concept of government in policy, it could be challenging to do this job.
Yes. Is the Governor's Council able to go on the road? In other words, do you have to meet at the State House, or are you able to meet, would you be able to meet in Springfield or Worcester or, say, Lowell, and have meetings that would be outside? I wonder if there wouldn't be some advantage to that, or at least in terms of making people be more aware of what the Governor's Council...
I'm so glad you asked that. So for the entire council to hold a formal hearing, the governor and lieutenant governor would have to endorse that and let us do it. However, what I have done, and you may not know it, because I actually haven't had a chance to do it here in Lowell, I've held public hearings which are more, they're not official hearings. I forget what we call it. We have a special name for them. But public information hearings, it's like a preliminary hearing to the person who's up for the judgeship. And I do that for that very reason, so people can come. We all talk about transparency, but I know people can't get to Boston at noontime, so I try to bring Boston to them in different towns. And we've done it in Peabody, Salem, Gloucester, in Lawrence, but I haven't come up to Lowell or Haverhill yet to do it. I haven't had appointments, as many appointments as, I say my district, as some of the other counselors. So maybe the next time we get someone that will be up in this area, we'll have a hearing here. Because it really is fascinating to do. Sometimes the cable TV will cover it, sometimes they won't. But it's a chance for the public to come and ask questions if they want to make a public testimony if they want, and just to see a little bit of the process. It's also an opportunity for the candidate who's being nominated to have people come, and they could come in opposition to them, but to come in support of them as well, because they're folks that can't come to Boston sometimes. They're working, or they're neighbors, or they're elderly, or it's amazing who comes. You know, we'll have somebody's high school teacher show up and say, you know, I knew he was going to be a good kid or whatever. Right. And that's really heartening because people do want to be part of the process. So I'd love to do a whole hearing someplace else, but I don't know. I can talk to the governor about it. You never know. You know, it really depends.
I think it's not a bad idea. I really think that it would just help make the governor's council be more visible, and I think
it would too.
I think it would give that in turn would help people to have more appreciation. I think that that's just good for a government in general.
I agree with you, because people don't realize we meet every week. They think we meet once a month and we do this or that, and I say, oh, no. We've had hearings that have gone on to 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
I mean, people are stunned when I say that. Under Governor Patrick, this governor has been not that the governor determines it, but we wouldn't even take lunch breaks sometimes. I mean, we'd be in there eating potato chips. We'd be so hungry.
Wow, yeah.
But now we tend to, it's a different group of councilors too who are, you know, we want to eat, so we'll break. But before, we would maybe a 15-minute break, and we would just go right in.
So does the lieutenant governor always preside over the meetings? Are there times when she's not able to be there, and so there's somebody else that takes?
If it is a vote, it has to be the lieutenant governor, or this week we had the governor. The lieutenant governor wasn't available, so the governor sat with us and saw the vote. Now, if it were a tie vote, he would not be able to break the tie.
Right.
There would be no way of doing it. After that, I believe the Secretary of State can sit in for them, but can't vote. But I don't know that ever happens.
Right.
I don't know that the Secretary of State would want to come down and sit with us, but the governor does. I mean, you know, Patrick had to, because we had no lieutenant governor.
Right.
So he sat with us every single week.
Right.
And that was a real, for us, for my district, that was great.
Right.
That was a great advantage.
Well, and the line of succession is different now than it used to be. I mean, when we talked about the times when the governor's council was the executive to replace the governor, lieutenant governor, now it would be the Secretary of State, and then I think it goes to the Attorney General and so forth, and further on down.
We're way down the line. Like everyone, I tell people 9 people would have to drop dead before we'd be in charge.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I'm not sure it even has ever gotten to the Secretary of State, although there's probably been times when for a few hours.
For a few hours, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably when Jane Swift gave birth.
Oh, there you go.
Actually, right?
Yes.
Because our Constitution has no provision to replace the lieutenant governor.
Right.
So she was the lieutenant governor who became the governor and then had twins. So probably that's a great trivia question.
Yeah, it is. I'm impressed that you were able to pull that one up.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
How long do you think you'll stay?
I don't think I'll stay forever.
Yeah.
Only because I think it's important to have, turnover.
Yeah.
I like what I'm doing right now. I'd like to do it for a little while longer, but I'm not going to be someone who's here for 20 years.
Right.
I don't think it's particularly healthy for this position, to be honest. And I know there's different schools of thought. I'm not a big fan of term limits, because I think elections are term limits.
Right.
And I think we need to vote, and if you vote and you're not happy with someone, you have a chance to change the term, right? You get somebody else in there.
Yeah.
Just me personally, I think because we deal with the judiciary and that's our main task, it's good to get new people. It's good to get different eyes and different folks on it.
Is there anything particularly on the Governor's Council that you would change the way that things are done now? Is there anything that you would want to do differently if you had your druthers and you could make all the rules for the Governor's Council? Is there anything that you would change?
That's one thing
around?
I would do. I was the first chairperson of the Rules Committee, and we are supposed to have rules. We're required to have rules, and we don't.
Okay.
And it's problematic that we don't. And Councilor Hurley, after I did my task on it, she came in. Now, Council Hurley is from Springfield, and she's a former mayor
Yeah.
of Springfield, and she's a former judge. And she came in her first term with the exact reaction I gave in my first term and said, where are the rules?
Right.
And so I gave her everything that I had done, and we've done a lot of work on it. And she was like, wow, this is really good work. Let's see what we can do. But there are some councilors that for some reason, they don't want to
They
have
don't
rules.
like rules.
I don't think it's good. I think you need to have rules. I mean, because they'll say, well, that's not how we do it. Well, really? Because there are no rules.
Right.
So,
But, well, you must operate under Robert's rules.
we
though, at
do
least for
operate
the-
under
for the
Robert's
yeah.
rules, but there are certain things that just would be nice to have a little bit more formality to.
Yeah.
I would love if the Constitution, frankly, had a provision for replacing the lieutenant governor, because I think it's a huge, I don't want to say burden, but people don't really understand what the lieutenant governor does.
Right.
Because they do, it depends who the governor is, what they do and what they get to do. However, in the time when we didn't have a lieutenant governor, it is a lot of work on the governor to sit with the council as well, to oversee those hearings. I mean, we had Supreme Judicial Court nominees. It's a lot of work
Yeah.
for them. I mean, they're the CEO of the Commonwealth, which is a major corporation, really, isn't it? You know, you're part of it. To ask them to be taking even a half an hour, it's just a difficult thing. So I think that would be a nice thing to have. And I'd like longer terms, only because our districts are huge. I represent 38 cities and towns.
Right.
So having more time, we serve a year. It's like you. We serve a year.
Yeah.
Then the next January, you have to go right into nomination papers in campaign
Right.
mode.
Yeah. So you spend half of your term.
I don't see how
running
that
for the
benefits the
next term.
citizens. I just don't.
Yeah.
I love campaigning. I love the retail politics.
Right.
So for me, it's like, I don't mind doing the parades. I don't mind doing the TV shows. I don't mind going to the caucuses and doing all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it is a lot. And it's a lot, as you know, it's a lot on your family too. You're like, I'm off to Pepperell tonight or
It is.
whatever. So
It is. But, none of us do it because we have to do it. We do it because we want
you
to do
do it because
right?
you want to do
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
that's
I
right.
mean, really, and I'm glad you said that, because I believe the cream rises to the top, and I believe most people enter public policy and government for the right reasons. We do have some folks that are not there for maybe the best reasons, but you have to really want to help people and to serve. And Republicans and Democrats in this state, we all want the same thing, meaning the best thing for the Commonwealth. We just have different ideas about how to get there. So.
Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for coming up. I think you're doing a great job
Thank
on the
you.
Governor's Council. I know that there have been other Governor's Councils that I've never seen, and I've seen you a lot.
Thank you. That's
and
the-
in different communities, too.
Thank you, Senator. That's the best compliment I get, is people have said to me, you've done things no one's done, and we know who you are. And they should, because I feel like I can't ask for your vote if you've never seen me.
Right.
So,
All right, well, thank you for coming along.
thank you
Thanks
for
coming.
having me. I love
All
it.
right, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for watching. This is the first edition of the Beacon Hill Buzz. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll have the second edition shortly. Thank you.